Welcome boys and girls, Kostin here with a discussion about Kislev in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Creative Assembly have vastly improved the Kislev experience through the rework they've done, but I do believe there are certain things that they should do in order to really put Kislev in an amazing spot. They're in a good spot, but they could use some more work. In fact, Creative Assembly themselves have stated that they were looking to do certain things for Kislev further, and then nothing for months and months on end. Makes you wonder what's been happening in the company, because it does seem that they've had some issues with development, or at least DLC development for Warhammer 3 and even patches potentially. Anyway, so let's talk about some of the things that I believe Kislev needs some improvement in some areas. One of these areas would be with the whole ice court system. Again, they've improved this like many other systems like Kislev, but it creates a kind of situation where you have a choice as a player. Either you can spend a lot of your early supporters and research in order to train these ice witches, and money too, keep in mind that, or you can use the load save character. Start the Kislev campaign, doesn't matter if it's Realms of Chaos, I recommend Gestalten there because you'll be able to get them at rank 1. And then just load them up. It's cheaper, it's faster, it works for Frost Maidens, it works for Ice Witches. I think that when you're looking at traits, especially traits that you can manage through a system in a campaign, obviously load save is something that you can abuse, but we're just literally talking not about characters that are loaded with legendary lore traits. We're just talking about characters going through the training for a couple of turns and then having access to them early on. And the kind of benefits that you get through these Ice Witches and Frost Maidens are significant. Growth in a province, construction cost reduction in a province, upkeep, campaign movement range. These things matter. They're certainly better than the Drazina and Boyars that Kislev has by default. My perspective on this, I think a system where you can recruit Ice Witches during the course of a campaign from the beginning would be great, but then if you want those kind of buffs, you only should have them for the course of that campaign and earn them over time potentially, or just, the Ice Court system should be about, okay, which buffs do you want to unlock, and you can only have so many buffs active, or you can pick and choose which lords and heroes you want those buffs active. Sure, it would create the issue of micromanagement, so that would be an UI issue, but I think it's better than either incentivizing the player to abuse the load save character system or incentivizing the player to just focus all their early game efforts, research, and supporters on that. The second thing to really talk about with regards to Kislev is actually the supporter situation itself. See, if you're playing a campaign as Katarin or Gestalten, you can easily gain supporters, but only for your side. So this primarily comes down from the idea of gaining supporters by fighting against chaos. But that's not how it works with the other side. On the flip side, if you're playing Astankia or Boris Ursus, you gain support, you gain support for both sides by fighting chaos, and you can also fight the enemies of both Gestalten and Katarin in order to gain even more supporters. So I think some rebalancing with regards to gaining supporters would be in order. To be clear, a much, much better system than what we had before, but it is really just a question of rebalancing with regards to that entire system. Third thing to talk about with Kislev campaigns, and a lot of these things are going to be in balance of Legendary Lord, but you look at Gestalten and Katarin. Gestalten and Katarin have Frozen, have Mountain, and have Temperate. Boris Ursus has all three of those, plus Wasteland, and also has neutral Chaotic Wasteland. and some benefits even in Chaotic Wasteland. Now, you can nullify climate penalties, but just having a climate inherently opens up so many more possibilities in a campaign. It is not even funny. So that means Astankia and Boris are far ahead, and Boris in particular, despite some of the issues he has in his start, just has so much more potential than the other three that it's not even funny. You want to paint the map as Kislev, play Boris. He will do a much better job than the other three combined because of the benefits he has. In fact, if your whole shtick is to fight chaos, guess who's really, really good at it? Boris. He has free resettlement of regions through his skill line. Sure, you can confederate them, absolutely, but he gets a bunch of different benefits as well. And he has more supporters than Katarin and Kastaltin combined, actually. So that is one of the really big balancing issues. Now, I'm not saying all legendary lords should be the same, but problem with Kislev is they kind of are the same because they all have to deal with the same problems. They all fight chaos. They're all incentivized to fight chaos. They all are heavily incentivized to gain control of Kislev. So that is not a great system. Fourth issue really is Kislev itself. You have these special cities in Kislev, but because they're single region provinces, for all the benefits you get militarily from the landmarks, you're really lacking in terms of economy. And Kislev and Erengrad in particular should be very rich cities in the lore. Erengrad is one of the richest cities in the world, actually, because of its trade, and you don't see that reflected. The Old World mod did a pretty good job with this by simply adding these cities to provinces, like 4 region provinces, so they're inherently more useful. Sure, you might have fewer atomins because of that, but let me tell you, in the grand scheme of things, you'll benefit far more from having the city. So the whole design of Kislev as a campaign area is certainly very questionable. It's very small. It doesn't work out. Like, you could easily double the size of Kislev. When I say easily, obviously I'm not talking from a game development standpoint, but I'm talking about, like, the impact it would have. You could double the area and would not necessarily change much in terms of, like, campaign pacing and all that. It would just mean Kislev actually has more of Kislev to fight with. And that's been an issue, not just for Kislev, but for everyone that deals with the campaign area. Like, look at the concentration of legendary lords. Like, concentration of legendary lords in a game creates its own issues for the AI, for yourself as the player. It means you're up against the biggest threats from the beginning, and then you just steamroll everything because you've dealt with those biggest threats. Like, just look at these campaigns. You got Frot, you've got Azazel, you got Trog, you've got Azak potentially. Hell, you've got also Archeon, Demon Prince, as useless as Daniel is, Wolfric potentially. That is a huge concentration of legendary lords. I think it's one of the highest concentration of legendary lords over this small of an area. Say what you will about the Nehekara, Thunderdome, or Lustria, there is at least some space, even if Lustria sucks, but that is one problem. It is a problem, of course, also in Bretonia, though even then Bretonia does not have as many legendary lords. You've got Kemler, Grom, Couronne, and Fey Enchantress. To a degree, Orion, sure, but not fully. It's kind of on the discussions. And if an area is worse and more concentrated than Bretonia, you have a problem. The whole design of the Immortal Empire's map does leave questionable decisions being made by CA in certain areas. Bretonia, Lustria, and Kislev are certainly the most questionable areas from my perspective. There are some great areas. Darklands, Cafe, for instance. Mountains, kind of. It's always questionable. Depends on a campaign, depends on race, depends on underway or not. There's a whole discussion on that, but suffice to say, that is something that does affect Kislev a lot. And then finally, for Kislev as a race, they have a great roster. A really, really good roster of units, really good infantry. If I am playing an Empire campaign, I cry for how bad the Empire infantry is compared to the Kislev infantry. Like, seriously, Kislevite warriors are better than halberdiers in every single way. They'll last more, they'll do more damage, they'll just win far more often than not. They're better as line holders, they're better against melee, they're better at resisting charges and all that. There's few benefits halberdiers have. And that's a tier 1 unit compared to a tier 2 unit. Yeah, just kind of a problem with the Empire. Just it's become better. Halberdiers used to be higher tier, but still not exactly great in that respect for Empire. The problem, though, with Kislev is they really lack artillery. Sure, you can use allied recruitment with dwarves with the Empire to get it, but I do think a system of being able to get a tier 2 artillery option would be really good, or moving little Groms from tier 4 in the campaign to tier 3. Like, I understand heavy war sleds should be a tier 4 unit. They're really good. But little Groms should not be a tier 4 unit, because they're a dedicated siege unit, and in general, restricting siege options does not lend itself to great campaign outcomes. Like, if you're playing Kislev campaign, thankfully, because of the good auto-resolve you can get with a lot of units, you can at least skip sieges, but yeah, it's not really a great dynamic over there. And then there's other things to talk about. Astankia's campaign mechanic just flat out sucks. Like, really, one of the least interesting campaign mechanics in the game. It's like a knockoff, a Grom's Cauldron from Wish.com, basically, with that. So Grom has tons of issues, but then you look at Katarin. Jeez, for one of the most powerful casters in the world, actually. Like, seriously, do you know how Kislev survived Grimgor when he invaded? They didn't stop him militarily, he crushed them. Katarin used her magic to stop him. And if you can stop a Wa on your own, then yeah, you're a high level of caster. It's also to do with the lore, the magic capability of Kislev casters, all that kind of stuff. But her entire skill line and her magic tree just leaves a lot to be desired. Kastaltin is better, Bastankia is better, Boris Ursa is pretty damn good, but yeah, Katarin is very, very lacking. To the point that genuinely, it's a lot better in a lot of ways to just use her as a Frostworm or Ice Court sled for harassment or melee capability. Not that she's particularly great in melee either, and then actually use Frost Maidens or Ice Witch Lords for magic because they can do it better. I'm not joking. Like an Ice Witch Lord, for instance, gets this Glacial Blaster, reducing spell resistance. Like, you can get that. Pretty good. Sure, Katarin may have some cheaper spells here and there, but she is really lacking. You want to know who are great casters in the game? Drazif is a great freaking caster. He's got amazing magic, and he's got amazing melee capability. Like, having very few hybrid lords actually work very well as hybrid. You look at Marafi, you look at Drazif. To some degree, Malekith, I emphasize to some degree because it's much, much better to focus on the melee aspect to Malekith. You can also consider the Cathan Dragons, again, to some degree. That would be my perspective on the subject. So those are the kind of key issues I would like to see improved for Kislev in a campaign situation. Maybe some rebalancing with supporters, because there are some things, like, I like the new system, but there are some things that are flat out insane, and then some things completely damn worthless. Basically, it's like, oh, do you want 6,000 defensive supplies in every region? Yay. Versus campaign movement range, thunderstorm, campaign movement range after a battle, and then flat out campaign movement range. Newly colonized ruined regions have extra growth. Construction costs for certain buildings, growth. Orthodoxy churches produce growth. You can get the idea. The point is, some things are amazing, some things are just like there to exist. So some rebalancing on that level would be in order. Great system, but I do think a lot of these things didn't get properly balanced, and they put more effort in this than what they did with Tomb Kings and Lizardmen, who also have their own balancing issues with respect to these kind of things. That's all I had to say. Kostin signing out. Let me know what you guys think. What you guys think Kislev could use. I don't expect CA to do another DLC for Kislev. The political reasons, IP reasons, all that kind of stuff. Like Games Workshop, Kislev does have a limited roster in fantasy. They're not there in old world. And Games Workshop has given them a lot of leeway as is, so that's one of the reasons I would not expect more stuff for Kislev. But free updates, various improvements, I think that is warranted. To be clear, Kislev is, if they change absolutely nothing about Kislev right now, they're in a good enough state, but they could be amazing. That's what I had to say.